Every year, thousands of people disappear inside national parks, some found within days, others never located at all. But when entire families vanish together, the odds of survival drop dramatically, and the questions multiply. What kind of force can erase not just one person, but everyone, without witnesses, without sound, and without a trace? This story begins underground. 3 years after a quiet family hike ended in silence, workers exploring an abandoned mine stumbled upon something so disturbing that authorities immediately sealed off the area. What they found inside would reopen a case long thought to be unsolvable. But for now, we're going to rewind, back to the day this family walked into the wilderness and never came home. They were not reckless thrill seekers. They were a close-knit family. 2 parents and their children, experienced hikers who respected nature and prepared carefully for every trip. This hike was supposed to be routine, a few hours on a familiar trail, fresh air, family photos, then dinner at home. Instead, their phones went silent. Calls rang unanswered, messages went undelivered. Their car remained parked at the trailhead long after sunset, doors locked, supplies still inside. Rangers followed the trail expecting to find lost hikers. What they found instead was nothing. No footprints, no cries for help, no signs of struggle, just an empty path stretching into the trees and a growing sense that something was terribly wrong. How does an entire family disappear at once? No ransom demand, no distress signal, no evidence pointing in any clear direction. For 3 long years, the case haunted investigators and devastated loved ones, until a chance discovery deep beneath the earth changed everything. A place no one had searched, a place few even knew existed. Stay with us until the end of this video, because what was found inside that abandoned mine doesn't just answer questions, it raises even darker ones. And once you hear the full story, you may never look at a simple family hike the same way again. Before their names became headlines, before their faces were printed on missing person posters, the Holloway family was known simply as that adventurous family everyone admired. They were the kind of people who seemed grounded, responsible, and deeply connected, not just to each other, but to the world around them. Mark Holloway, 42, was a mechanical engineer who loved solving problems and planning every detail of family outings. Calm, methodical, and protective, Mark was known among friends as the steady anchor of the household. His wife, Laura Holloway, 39, worked as an elementary school teacher. She was warm, patient, and endlessly curious, someone who believed that the best lessons didn't come from textbooks, but from experiences shared together. Their children completed the picture. Ethan, 14, was thoughtful and quiet, fascinated by geology and survival skills. He carried a notebook on every hike, sketching rock formations and mapping trails. Mia, 9, was energetic, fearless, and endlessly inquisitive, often racing ahead on the trail before being gently called back by her parents. The Holloways lived an active, outdoors-centered lifestyle. Weekends were rarely spent indoors. Hiking, camping, kayaking, and road trips were part of their routine, not rare adventures. Friends often joked that their minivan looked more like a mobile base camp than a family car. In their community, they were respected, well-liked, and trusted. Volunteers at local cleanup events, regular attendees at school functions, and familiar faces on nearby trails. Inside the family, the bond was strong and affectionate. Mark planned, Laura nurtured, Ethan analyzed, and Mia brought joy and energy. Decisions were made together. Rules were discussed, not enforced. That closeness was exactly why this hike mattered so much. It wasn't just recreation. It was their way of reconnecting as a family after months of busy schedules, school stress, and long work hours. The trail they chose wasn't new to them. The Holloways had completed more challenging hikes before and were well versed in safety. They carried maps, extra water, first aid kits, and knew how to recognize weather shifts and terrain risks. Mark had even completed a wilderness safety course years earlier. There was no recklessness, no lack of preparation, no sign of danger. To everyone who knew them, this was just another responsible family doing what they loved most, spending time together in nature. And that's what makes their disappearance so unsettling, because families like the Holloways don't just vanish. The day they disappeared. The day the Holloway family vanished began like countless others before it, quiet, ordinary, and entirely unremarkable. That normalcy is what makes the timeline so chilling. There was no chaos, no warning, no moment where anyone realized they were witnessing the beginning of a tragedy. At 8:12 a.m., the family's SUV pulled into the Pine Ridge Loop Trail parking area. Surveillance footage from a park-mounted camera shows Mark stepping out first, stretching his arms and checking the weather on his phone. Laura followed, adjusting Mia's backpack straps, while Ethan studied the trail map posted near the entrance. The family appeared calm, relaxed, and unhurried. Nothing in their body language suggested stress or concern. At 8:19 a.m., they officially entered the trail. This moment, captured briefly on camera, would become the last confirmed visual record of the Holloway family together. Over the next hour, their movements could be partially reconstructed through phone data and eyewitness accounts. At 8:47 a.m., Mark's phone pinged a nearby cell tower, placing the family roughly 1.6 miles into the loop. At 9:03 a.m., Laura sent a photo to her sister showing a scenic overlook with the caption, "Perfect morning for this." It would be the last message she ever sent. Two separate hikers later reported seeing a family matching their description between 9:10 and 9:25 a.m. One witness recalled the children walking ahead while the parents followed closely behind. Another remembered Mia laughing loudly near a narrow section of the trail that bordered a steep ravine. These sightings aligned with the known route and raised no alarms at the time. Then, abruptly, everything stopped. At 9:41 a.m., Ethan's phone registered a final location ping near a wooded offshoot just beyond the midpoint of the trail. No messages were sent, no calls were made. Within minutes, all 4 devices went silent. Investigators later confirmed that this was not due to dead batteries. The phones simply stopped transmitting, as if they had all entered an area with no signal at the same time. By early afternoon, concern began to grow. Laura failed to answer her sister's follow-up text. Mark missed a scheduled call with a coworker. By 6:30 p.m., after sunset approached and the family still hadn't returned, a park ranger noticed the Holloway's SUV still parked at the trailhead, exactly where it had been that morning. The vehicle itself raised immediate questions. It was locked. There were no signs of tampering. Inside were items that suggested the family never intended to stay out late: an extra jacket, a cooler with food still inside, and a folded trail brochure on the dashboard. Their car seats were empty. Their keys were not inside. Whatever happened, it happened on the trail. Rangers initially assumed the most common scenario: overdue hikers. It wasn't unusual for families to misjudge time or linger at scenic points. Still, standard procedure required action. By 7:15 p.m., park officials began a preliminary sweep of the trail, calling out names and scanning the path with flashlights. That's when the first red flags appeared. Near a narrow bend roughly 2 miles in, rangers found a child's baseball cap lying just off the trail. A short distance away, a partially crushed water bottle rested against a rock. Neither item showed signs of damage or struggle. They looked placed or dropped rather than torn away. No footprints led off the path, no blood, no torn clothing, no sign of a fall. By 9 p.m., the assumption of overdue hikers began to feel dangerously inadequate. 4 people, 2 adults and 2 children,
do not simply disappear together without leaving evidence behind. Rangers escalated the situation, alerting search and rescue teams and contacting local authorities. As night fell over Pine Ridge, the forest grew silent. No calls for help echoed through the trees. No movement was detected on thermal scanners. The trail that had welcomed hundreds of hikers before now felt unnervingly empty. By the end of the night, one question dominated every discussion. How does an entire family vanish in broad daylight on a well-marked trail without a single clear sign of what happened next? This was no longer a case of hikers running late. It was the beginning of a mystery that would haunt investigators for years.
Search and rescue. The first 72 hours. When the Holloway family failed to return by nightfall, the situation shifted from concern to crisis. In wilderness cases, the first 72 hours are critical, the window where survival is most likely, and every minute matters. By the time darkness settled over Pine Ridge Loop, park rangers knew they were racing against time. At 9:27 p.m., the missing family report was officially filed. Rangers immediately alerted county search and rescue teams, local law enforcement, and emergency response units. Within hours, the quiet trail transformed into a coordinated rescue zone. Headlamps cut through the darkness as teams spread out, calling the families' names into the forest, hoping for any reply. By sunrise on day one, the operation had escalated dramatically. Helicopters began sweeping the canopy, their rotors echoing through the valleys. Drones equipped with thermal imaging scanned ravines, treetops, and dense brush where visibility was nearly zero from the ground. Canine units were brought in, trained dogs working scent articles taken from the family's vehicle. But Pine Ridge presented immediate challenges. The terrain was rugged, filled with steep drop-offs, hidden crevices, and thick undergrowth that slowed progress to a crawl. In several areas, old logging paths and unmarked offshoots branched away from the main trail, complicating search patterns. To make matters worse, shifting weather moved in. Low clouds reduced aerial visibility, and intermittent fog settled into the ravines, disrupting drone scans and helicopter passes. As searchers pressed deeper, the first items were found, and with them, more confusion. A child-sized jacket was discovered folded near a cluster of rocks less than 2 miles from the trailhead. Nearby, a backpack containing snacks and a partially eaten granola bar rested upright against a tree. There were no signs of tearing, dragging, or violence. These weren't the scattered remains of a struggle. They looked almost deliberately left behind. Footprints were detected in soft soil near a creek crossing, but they abruptly disappeared on rocky ground. Dogs picked up scent trails that led toward the ravine, then suddenly turned back toward the trail, only to vanish entirely. One handler described it as a scent that just stopped existing. By day 2, exhaustion began to set in. Volunteers joined the effort, forming search lines and covering miles of terrain. Teams rappelled into ravines and combed through underbrush thick enough to tear clothing. Still, no voices, no movement, no clear direction. The emotional toll on rescuers was palpable. Many were parents themselves. Calling out children's names into an empty forest weighed heavily on them. One ranger later admitted that the silence was the hardest part. Not hearing laughter, crying, or even fear, just stillness. On day 3, the weather worsened. Rain washed away potential tracks and dampened scent trails. Helicopters were grounded for hours at a time. Despite expanding the search radius, nothing definitive emerged. The dogs continued to give conflicting signals. The terrain refused to give up its secrets. By the end of the 72-hour window,
A grim realization settled among command staff. The Holloways were no longer in the areas being searched, or something had happened that left no ordinary trace. What began as a rescue mission was slowly, painfully transforming into something else, and the forest remained silent. The case goes national. As the first 72 hours passed with no sign of the Holloway family, the story broke beyond local news and quickly captured national attention. A family of 4 disappearing on a well-marked hiking trail was the kind of mystery that unsettled people everywhere. It was familiar enough to feel personal, yet strange enough to feel deeply wrong. Morning news shows began leading with their story. Screens filled with smiling family photos, Mark and Laura standing shoulder to shoulder, Ethan holding his notebook, and Mia grinning brightly with her small camera. Headlines asked the same haunting question: how does an entire family vanish without a trace? The images were impossible to ignore. They looked like any family. They looked like everyone. Within days, the case exploded across social media. Hashtags bearing the family's name spread rapidly. Armchair investigators dissected maps, timelines, and drone footage screenshots. Some users claimed to spot shapes in satellite images. Others insisted they had heard rumors of strange activity in the park for years. Theories multiplied faster than facts, ranging from the plausible to the extreme. Volunteers flooded into the area from neighboring states. Families canceled vacations to help search. Church groups organized supply stations. College students took time off to walk search lines. At one point, authorities had to turn people away, not because help wasn't needed, but because the terrain had become dangerously overcrowded. The desire to help was overwhelming, but coordination became increasingly difficult. With national attention came intense pressure on law enforcement. Daily press briefings were held, microphones clustered in front of exhausted officials who had few updates to offer. Reporters demanded answers. Why weren't more areas being searched? Why weren't the children's phones tracked more aggressively? Why hadn't the abandoned mine rumors been fully investigated? Every decision was scrutinized. In response, officials began publicly addressing early theories. They acknowledged the possibility of an accidental fall, particularly given the ravines near the trail. They addressed concerns about wildlife encounters, though no evidence supported an attack. They dismissed foul play due to the absence of struggle, but admitted it couldn't be ruled out. They also cautiously mentioned the idea of disorientation, a scenario where the family might have strayed off trail and become lost together. None of the explanations satisfied the public. The lack of evidence fueled speculation rather than calmed it. Some accused authorities of withholding information. Others believed the family had discovered something they weren't supposed to see. As the days stretched into weeks, the Holloway case became more than a missing person investigation. It became a national obsession, a symbol of how quickly safety can vanish, a reminder that nature, no matter how familiar, can still hide devastating secrets. And as attention grew, so did expectations. Everyone wanted answers. But the forest remained silent. Investigation and early theories. With public pressure mounting and no physical trail to follow, investigators were forced to do what they often must in the absence of evidence: explore every possible explanation, no matter how unlikely or uncomfortable. What could have happened to an entire family in broad daylight on a familiar trail and left almost nothing behind? Animal attack theory. The first and most immediate theory considered was a wildlife encounter. The Pine Ridge region was home to bears, mountain lions, and other large predators. On paper, the idea seemed plausible, especially given the presence of children. But the evidence didn't support it. Animal attacks leave unmistakable signs: blood, drag marks, torn clothing, disturbed vegetation. Search teams found none of these. Not a single trace suggested a struggle. No animal tracks overlapped the family's last known location. Even the dogs showed no indication of predator interference. Investigators quietly ruled this theory out within days. Accidental fall or environmental hazard. Next came the possibility of an accident. The trail bordered steep ravines, rocky outcrops, and unstable ground in several areas. A misstep could have sent one family member tumbling, and others might have followed in an attempt to help. Yet again, the scene told a different story. No broken branches, no disturbed soil, no sounds reported by nearby hikers, and critically, no evidence of 4 bodies falling together. Extensive searches of ravines and water sources yielded nothing. If an accident had occurred, something, anything, should have surfaced. Carbon monoxide exposure from mine gases. As rumors of abandoned mines resurfaced, investigators explored a more unsettling possibility: toxic gas exposure. Old mines can trap carbon monoxide, methane, and other deadly gases. A family unknowingly entering such a space could become disoriented or lose consciousness within minutes. This theory gained quiet traction among investigators even before the mine was officially searched years later. It could explain the sudden disappearance, the lack of distress signals, and the absence of struggle. But at the time, there was one major problem. No confirmed mine entrances were listed near the trail, and no evidence placed the family underground. Without proof, the theory remained speculative. Foul play or targeted attack. The public pushed hard on the idea of foul play. Could someone have been waiting on the trail? Could the family have crossed paths with the wrong person? Investigators examined criminal activity in the region, reviewed known offenders, and investigated similar cases. Nothing matched. There were no witnesses to suspicious behavior, no reports of confrontation, no forensic evidence suggesting violence. Abducting 4 people, silently, in daylight, without leaving a trace, was considered extremely unlikely. Family conflict theories. At one point, investigators were forced to examine the most uncomfortable possibility: internal family conflict. This line of inquiry was brief and ultimately dismissed. Interviews with friends, teachers, co-workers, and relatives painted a consistent picture of a stable, loving family. There were no financial problems, no history of abuse, no warning signs. The Holloways had no reason to vanish, and no history suggesting they would harm one another. Evidence that didn't fit any theory. What truly haunted investigators wasn't what they found, it was what they didn't. Phones stopped simultaneously. Scent trails vanished mid-path. Belongings appeared placed, not lost. Each theory explained part of the mystery, but none explained all of it. By the end of the first year, investigators were left with a growing realization that whatever happened to the Holloway family did not follow a normal pattern. The case resisted logic, probability, and precedent. And somewhere beneath the forest, unnoticed, unmarked, and unsearched, lay the answer. They just didn't know it yet. 1 year later, a case grows cold. 1 year after the Holloway family disappeared, the forest looked the same, but everything else had changed. The trail had reopened. New hikers passed the same overlooks where search teams once stood calling out names. Life moved forward, but for the people who loved the Holloways, time felt frozen. In the months following the disappearance, search activity slowed, not because investigators had given up, but because resources were finite and leads were non-existent. Large-scale operations were replaced by targeted sweeps conducted when new tips came in. Helicopters no longer circled overhead. The drones were grounded. The urgency that defined the early days had quietly drained away. For the family's extended relatives, the pain settled into something heavier. Mark's parents visited the trail on the anniversary of the disappearance, leaving flowers at the entrance. Laura's sister organized candlelight vigils every few months, each one smaller than the last. Still, they showed up. Still, they hoped. Behind the scenes, the investigation suffered unavoidable setbacks. Lead detectives were reassigned to active cases with clearer paths forward. Budget limitations forced officials to prioritize solvable crimes. The Holloway file, thick with maps, interviews, and unanswered questions, was moved to a shelf marked inactive. It was not closed, but it was no longer a daily focus. The unanswered questions lingered, growing heavier with time. Why did the phones stop together? Why were some belongings found neatly placed? Why did the dogs lose the scent so suddenly? None of it added up, and without new evidence, those questions had nowhere to go. The emotional toll on the family was profound. Birthdays passed without celebrations. Holidays became reminders of empty chairs and unfinished traditions. The children's friends grew older. School years advanced. Life milestones arrived without them. For investigators, the case became one of those that quietly haunted them. Several admitted later that the Holloways were never far from their thoughts. There was a sense that something critical had been missed, but no way to know what it was. As the first anniversary faded into the second year, hope did not disappear, but it changed. It became quieter, more cautious, less about rescue and more about answers. The forest, unchanged and indifferent, held on to its secret, and for now, the Holloway family remained lost to it.
3 years missing, the shocking discovery. 3 years after the Holloway family vanished, their case had faded from headlines, but not from the landscape itself. Pine Ridge Loop Trail had returned to normal use. New signs stood where old ones had weathered away. Moss crept over the rocks once examined by search teams. To most visitors, the forest was peaceful again. But beneath that calm surface, something had been waiting. The abandoned mine was rediscovered by accident. In early autumn, a state-funded land survey was commissioned to assess erosion risks in remote sections of the park. The goal was routine: identify unstable ground that could endanger hikers. A small team of geologists and park maintenance workers were assigned to map areas that had been largely ignored since the original search years earlier, regions deemed too remote or unlikely to hold relevance at the time. One of those regions sat beyond the original search perimeter. While navigating a heavily overgrown slope, a surveyor noticed an unnatural depression in the ground, an uneven collapse partially hidden by brush and fallen branches. Old timbers, darkened by age and rot, protruded from the earth at an unnatural angle. There were no warning signs, no markers, just a quiet opening that shouldn't have been there. It was an abandoned mine shaft. At first, the team hesitated. Entering old mines is extremely dangerous. Collapses, toxic gases, and unstable supports make them some of the most lethal forgotten structures in wilderness areas. But when they shined a light inside, something caught their attention, an object that didn't belong. They didn't go far, just a few cautious steps inside the entrance, and then they stopped. What they saw was enough to make them retreat immediately and call authorities. Law enforcement arrived within hours. The area was sealed off. The trail nearby was quietly closed for maintenance, though officials already knew this was something far more serious. Specialized mine rescue units were contacted, along with forensic teams.
This was no longer an issue, it was a potential crime scene. The mine itself had a long, largely forgotten history. Records showed it dated back to the early 1900s, part of a short-lived extraction operation that had shut down after repeated safety violations. Officially, it had been listed as sealed decades earlier, but erosion, time, and neglect had reopened what was never meant to be accessible again. Mines like this are death traps. Carbon monoxide can build without warning. Oxygen levels can suddenly drop. One wrong step can send someone tumbling into darkness. Even trained professionals treat them with extreme caution. As investigators began reviewing old maps and historical documents, something unsettling emerged. The mine's location sat shockingly close to the Holloway family's last confirmed phone ping, just far enough off the main trail to be missed, but close enough that a curious family could stumble upon it without realizing the danger. Then came the evidence. Near the entrance, partially buried beneath debris, investigators found signs of recent disturbance. Branches snapped inward, not outward. Footprints, long since degraded but still visible enough to suggest multiple people had entered the area. Deeper inside, faint impressions suggested movement that search teams had never considered possible 3 years earlier. At this stage, officials refused to comment publicly. Press releases were vague. The case, once dormant, was suddenly active again. Detectives who had worked the original investigation were called back. Old files were reopened. Timelines were re-examined with new eyes. For the first time in years, there was a direction. But no one was prepared for what lay further inside the mine. Because whatever happened to the Holloway family didn't end on the trail. It ended in the dark. The gruesome find. When law enforcement and rescue teams finally entered the abandoned mine, the air was thick with dust, decay, and the lingering sense of neglect. Flashlights illuminated jagged rock walls and unstable timber supports, but what they discovered inside went beyond anything anyone had imagined. The remains of the Holloway family were found roughly 200 feet from the mine entrance in a partially collapsed section. The positioning of each body told a tragic story. The parents closest to one another, protective as if instinct carried them even in the darkness, and the children slightly apart, one near a pile of fallen rocks that might have offered minimal shelter. There were no signs of external trauma consistent with an attack, but their emaciated condition and pale, fragile state suggested long-term deprivation and exposure. Scattered nearby were personal items, a small notebook partially filled with sketches that had belonged to Ethan, a camera, cracked but still intact, from Mia, and Mark's multi-tool lying against a rock as though it had been set down deliberately. There were remnants of makeshift bedding, leaves, cloth scraps, and small bundles of gathered materials. Some evidence suggested attempted escape, with footprints leading towards blocked passages only to be cut off by collapses or debris. The mine's labyrinthine structure explained why they had never been detected. Narrow passages, unstable flooring, and multiple blocked shafts made standard search methods nearly impossible. Even with drones and canine units, thermal imaging failed in these enclosed spaces, and scent trails disappeared quickly amid the cool, still air. By carefully examining the site, investigators began reconstructing a timeline. The family likely entered the mine shortly after leaving the trail, misjudged its hazards, and became trapped as passages collapsed. Days stretched into weeks, and the family attempted to survive as best they could, using the limited supplies and natural resources available. The tragedy was unimaginable. They survived far longer than anyone expected, long enough for hope to remain alive for rescuers and for families at home to cling to the possibility they would return.
Forensic analysis and final answers. Once the bodies were recovered, forensic teams took over. Scientific examination offered both clarity and heartbreak. Cause of death findings. Investigators concluded that the Holloways succumbed primarily to starvation and exposure, with the father and mother attempting to shield their children for as long as possible. There was no evidence of foul play or violent assault. Toxicology results. Samples indicated no poisoning, drugs, or alcohol. There were traces of mild carbon monoxide exposure from residual mine gases, which may have contributed to confusion and disorientation, but it was not the direct cause of death. Injuries and environmental exposure. Minor fractures consistent with slips and small rockfalls were present, along with superficial cuts and bruises from navigating the collapsed passages. Hypothermia and dehydration were significant factors, as the mine's temperature fluctuated and water sources were limited. Survival duration. Forensic experts estimated that the family survived several days inside the mine, rationing the minimal food they carried, attempting to find exits, and using their wits to stay together. Their endurance explains why initial search efforts failed. By the time the mine was discovered, the signatures of movement had long since vanished. Why no signals were detected? The depth and structure of the mine prevented phone signals and radio waves from transmitting. Cell towers could not pick up their devices, and thermal imaging from above was completely ineffective in the narrow, collapsed chambers. The moment investigators understood what happened. By combining structural analysis of the mine with forensic findings, detectives finally reconstructed the events. The Holloways, confident in their experience, had explored the mine, underestimated its hazards, and became trapped as passages collapsed behind them. They survived as long as possible, making a valiant, tragic effort to protect one another. What began as a day hike had ended in an underground ordeal that no one could have predicted. The discovery brought closure to a case that had haunted families, investigators, and a nation, but the story remained haunting. It was a testament to both human resilience and the unpredictable, often unforgiving power of nature. Aftermath and unanswered questions. The discovery of the Holloway family's fate brought a mix of relief and devastation. Relief because after 3 long years, answers had finally arrived. Devastation because the answers were far darker than anyone could have imagined. Families, friends, and the broader community struggled to reconcile the knowledge that their loved ones had survived longer than expected, but ultimately could not escape the unforgiving mine. For Mark and Laura's extended families, closure was bittersweet. Funeral services were held together, giving them a chance to grieve as a unit, yet the haunting memories of those final days in the wilderness remained vivid. Community members, once rallying around search efforts, now gathered to mourn a tragedy that could have touched anyone. Local schools, neighbors, and park staff all felt the weight of the loss. For many, the case became a symbol of vulnerability, even in places considered safe and familiar. The discovery also sparked legal and policy changes. Park authorities reviewed and updated safety regulations for trails near abandoned structures. Warning signs were erected at trailheads and near known mine entrances. State agencies introduced new protocols for search and rescue in remote, hazardous areas. Lawsuits were filed against landowners and park administrators for failing to secure dangerous areas, though most focused on improving safety measures rather than assigning blame. Public conversation shifted to mine safety and wilderness awareness. Experts highlighted that many abandoned mines, long forgotten, remain poorly marked, unstable, and lethal. Discussions emphasized the importance of staying on marked trails, avoiding uncharted areas, and understanding that even experienced hikers are vulnerable to hidden hazards. Yet, despite exhaustive investigation, some questions lingered. Why did the family choose to explore the mine at all? Could any warning have prevented them from entering? Were there subtle environmental cues they missed?
Why had early search efforts failed to detect their presence? Even with forensic science providing clarity, the mystery of their initial decision and the tension, fear, and hope during those final days remained partially unknowable. Experts agree the tragedy might have been mitigated but not fully prevented. Better signage, updated maps, and public awareness could have reduced the risk, yet human curiosity, family bonding, and the drive to explore made such encounters inherently unpredictable. Sometimes nature and circumstance converge in ways that even the most careful preparations cannot anticipate. The Holloway case serves as a somber reminder. Adventure carries beauty, but also risk. And while science, policy, and vigilance can save lives, the wilderness keeps its secrets, often until it is too late. It is a story that leaves viewers unsettled, reflecting on both human resilience and the hidden dangers lurking in the places we consider familiar. Conclusion: a warning from the wilderness. The Holloway family's story is one that begins with adventure and ends in tragedy, a stark reminder of how quickly ordinary moments can turn catastrophic. A routine family hike intended for bonding, fresh air, and the joy of exploration became a cautionary tale that continues to echo through the wilderness and in the hearts of those who loved them. For 3 long years, hope and uncertainty coexisted. Families and communities waited, searched, and prayed. When the truth finally emerged from the abandoned mine, the relief of answers was overshadowed with grief. The parents who had nurtured, protected, and guided their children were gone. The laughter, the curiosity, the ordinary joys of family life all extinguished under the weight of circumstances no one could have foreseen. This tragedy offers critical lessons. Abandoned structures, long-forgotten mines, and hidden hazards in natural environments are not relics of history. They are real, active dangers. Even the most experienced hikers can fall victim to unstable terrain, unseen threats, and the deceptive calm of wilderness landscapes. Maps and warning signs are essential, but vigilance, respect, and preparation are equally vital. For anyone venturing into nature, the Holloway story is a haunting reminder. The wilderness demands humility. Trails that appear familiar can conceal treacherous hazards. Curiosity can lead to peril when it ignores unseen risks. Even short excursions require planning, equipment, and awareness of potential threats that lurk out of sight. Above all, this story urges reflection. It asks us to cherish every moment with our loved ones, to respect nature's power, and to prepare for the unexpected. Adventure carries beauty, yes, but also consequences. The line between exploration and tragedy is often thin and invisible, as the Holloway family learned too late. So to all who hear this story, walk carefully, hike responsibly, and never underestimate the hidden dangers that lie just beyond the trailhead. Nature will reward respect, but it will also remind us of its power when we least expect it. The Holloway family's journey may have ended in darkness, but their story remains a beacon, a warning, a lesson, and a call to action for everyone who seeks the wild. Tied to the full story, the Holloway family's disappearance and tragic end is a story that begins with innocence and adventure, but descends into one of the most haunting mysteries in modern wilderness history. From their cheerful arrival to Pine Ridge Loop to the silent forest that swallowed them whole, every step of their journey reminds us how quickly ordinary moments can turn catastrophic. For 3 years, families, friends, and investigators clung to hope, piecing together fragments of a life they barely understood. Maps, phone pings, and fleeting eyewitness accounts could not predict what lay ahead, an abandoned mine that concealed the final chapters of their story. When the discovery was made, the relief of answers collided with a profound grief. 4 lives full of promise and love, lost to circumstances no one could foresee. Yet in the tragedy lies an urgent lesson. The wilderness is unforgiving, and even familiar trails can conceal hidden dangers, old mines, sudden drop-offs, unstable terrain.
Preparation, awareness, and respect for nature are not optional, they are vital. What seemed like a simple day hike became a deadly reminder that curiosity and human resilience, while admirable, are sometimes not enough against unseen hazards. The emotional resonance of the Holloway story extends beyond the forest. It reminds us to cherish family, to value life's fleeting moments, and to approach every adventure with caution. It is a story of human endurance, parental love, and the quiet terror of being lost where no one can reach you. As we close this account, remember the Holloways not just as victims, but as a warning. Walk carefully, respect the wild, prepare for the unexpected, and never take the safety of the ordinary for granted. Because sometimes the greatest threats are the ones hidden just beyond the trailhead.